Blue can look strangely innocent. Once it has entered cloth, it seems to have no beginning. No field, no season, no argument over who must grow it. Yet in 1860, a cultivator named Hagi Moller told an official inquiry that he would rather leave or beg than sow indigo. His answer belonged to one witness, but it opens the question hidden inside that calm color. How had a green plant become a burden so severe that refusing it felt worth such a cost? The plant was Indigofera tinctoria, one of several plants capable of yielding indigo. The crop itself was green. Its color had to be released. Harvested plants were steeped in water. Substances inside them were transformed and exposed to air. Blue indigo separated from the liquid to be collected, pressed and dried. Fresh plants had to reach water and processing facilities quickly. A dye factory therefore needed more than vats and workers. It needed the surrounding countryside and decisions about what its fields would grow. To understand Hagi Moller's refusal, follow the plant backward from the vat. In Lower Bengal, the European entrepreneur managing an indigo factory carried the title planter. Cultivation itself was usually done by ryots, the people English records called ryots. Factory agents offered advances and arranged for some of their fields to produce indigo. The plants returned to the factory, where largely separate wage laborers processed them. Their distant appetite for blue had acquired a local machine, factory, account book, water, field and household. An advance could look like help at the beginning of a season, and some cultivators entered agreements willingly. The imbalance appeared in what followed. Even before contracts tightened, indigo exposed a field to flood, drought, repeated labor and uncertain dye yield. The crop often paid poorly. Balances could be difficult to clear, and another advance could carry the obligation into another season. Factory influence reached into rent, land and local justice. Agents and armed retainers could add illegal force. Conditions varied by district. The system became most coercive when a cultivator tried to leave. The crisis grew when private reluctance became shared knowledge. In February 1859, the magistrate Ashley Eden issued a statement making clear that sowing indigo was optional. Existing grievances now had a legal opening that could travel through village relationships. One household refusing alone remained vulnerable to pressure. Neighbors refusing together changed the meaning of an unsown indigo field. It became a decision and a signal that others could read. Across parts of Bengal, cultivators began refusing advances, seed and cultivation. Information traveled through village relationships, so did confidence. The movement became known as the Indigo Revolt, or Nil Bidroho. Collective refusal supplied its center, while leaders and tactics remained local. Petitions, legal action, withdrawal of services and organized non-cooperation existed beside threats, attacks and localized physical defense. At Bolobpur, one local account describes villagers organizing different defensive groups, including women using household objects against planter retainers. It was one place, not a portrait of the whole movement. Factories expected green plants to arrive. Increasingly, they did not. The system pushed back. Planter pressure continued, and a temporary law in March 1860 strengthened attempts to enforce indigo contracts. Some confrontations became violent, yet law and local force failed to rebuild the old field-to-factory chain reliably. The system's output depended on cultivators setting aside land, sowing, tending, and cutting the crop. Collective refusal struck the material dependency beneath planter power. Once it spread, the weakness became visible. Vats could not process a crop that households would not sow, and an account book could not manufacture leaves. The conflict had outgrown the language of private disagreement. The colonial government appointed an Indigo Commission. Between May and August 1860, cultivators, planters, officials, missionaries and landholders entered the same contested record with sharply unequal power. The arrangement, praised as enterprise by one witness, could appear as debt and fear in another's account. There, Hagi Moller's answer gave one cultivator's refusal a name. Experiences scattered across fields, debts and local complaints now occupied government pages. The inquiry recorded a crisis collective action had already created, making indigo's machinery officially difficult to keep out of view. After the commission reported, Dinobandhu Mitro's Bengali drama Nil Darpan, the indigo planting mirror, gave the conflict another form. Arriving after the revolt and inquiry, the play's historical role lay in public interpretation. A struggle first carried by fields and village relationships now entered a printed mirror. In Bengali and later English circulation, village suffering became public drama. The question had reached beyond the decision to plant. Who could describe planter violence? Whose version could travel? And what reputation did the indigo system deserve? Collective refusal interrupted the crop supply on which the old arrangement depended, and attempts to restore cultivation on the former terms repeatedly failed. Most indigo factories in Lower Bengal closed, while production continued in other regions and in some remaining Bengal operations. The outcome stayed regional and incomplete. Debt, rent conflict, and colonial rule survived. Its concrete achievement could be seen in fields where the old demand no longer carried the same command. A system that had made individual refusal dangerously difficult had been broken by refusal practiced together. By the time indigo returned from Bengal as a calm, finished blue, its surface had erased the journey. The cloth revealed neither green plants being hurried toward the vats, nor an account book resting beside a cultivator's field. Along the river roads, some factory yards waited longer for the carts they had expected. Fields once counted in advance now held other crops, or simply held no indigo. River light passed over the same blue surface on its way downstream. At the warehouse, cakes of pigment still stacked one beside another. Across the ocean, the cloth looked as it had before. Back in Bengal, a factory ledger waited beside an empty line, where the next crop should have been. The cloth remained blue. Its history did not.